In the beginning was the apocalypse. One of the weird things in church, and there's a lot of weird things to choose from in church, but one of the weird things that I'm thinking about in particular today is that the new church year always begins with apocalypse. The long season that we call ordinary time, a season that began way back in the day of Pentecost, comes to an end. We start reading a new gospel, sometimes Luke, sometimes Matthew, this year Mark. We enter into a new season, the season of Advent, of waiting, of preparation, of getting ready. And regardless of which gospel we are in, Jesus tells us stories of apocalypse. Now, maybe because of the Left Behind series of books and action movies, a lot of us are accustomed to thinking of apocalypse as stuff blowing up. And to some extent, that is biblical. Jesus does talk about the sun darkening and stars falling from heaven. But to a larger extent, apocalypse as explosion and folks being sucked into the air is a latter invention. Kind of like our understanding of hell is less about the Bible and way more about Dante. The word apocalypse, at least as we find it in the Bible, actually doesn't mean everything blows up. It means revelation or unveiling. So the final book in the collection of books that we call the Bible is the Apocalypse of John, the Revelation of John. We could equally defensively translate it as the Unveiling of John. When a magician does one of those tricks in which they whip a sheet off of something and that something is changed, instead of saying, ta-da, the magician could totally say, apocalypse. Now, when something is unveiled, sometimes it is like an explosion. Sometimes you really do say, oh no. I am a fan of horror films, and I know that the unveiling is often the moment when you jump a mile out of your seat. But unveiling is sometimes also the moment when you say, aha. Here is the American playwright Thornton Wilder. Wilder says, "This is the way things are. I have always known it without being fully aware that I knew it. Now, in the presence of this play or novel or poem or picture or piece of music, I know that I know it." That is apocalypse. That is revelation. That is unveiling. Wilder is talking specifically about apocalypse via art, but we would not have to change his sentence at all to make it to apply to apocalypse via service, via learning, via prayer, via connective laughter, via grief, via ecstasy. The list goes on. In the presence of this experience, this encounter, something is unveiled. I know that I know. Apocalypse. Ta-da. Aha. Oh no. And that oh no reminds us that apocalypse is not always comfortable or easy. This knowing that you know, sometimes it really is like the sun darkening and the stars falling from the sky. The wonderful contemporary theologian David Dark makes the case that we are living in an apocalypse moment in America right now. For a lot of white folks, for instance, we had this vague idea prior to a few years ago, maybe prior even to 2020, that racism in America was maybe still a problem, that black folks were not imagining things when they told us that they were treated utterly differently by police and by doctors and by bankers. But via the Black Lives Matter protests of this year, many white folks were motivated to do work like the Sacred Ground program that we are doing right here at Grace. And because of that work, we now know that we know, or at least we are beginning to know that we know. Apocalypse. This unveiling is hard. Dark gives another example. He talks about when the pandemic kicked in and folks who work at grocery stores got declared essential workers. And he learned that a lot of people who stock a lot of shelves don't get paid sick leave. He started asking, how is this just? How is this fair? How is this neighborly? I'm reminded of my own experience a few years ago when we hosted a speaker as part of the movement to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. You may remember the woman who came to speak here at Grace. She was a Southwest Airlines employee, And prior to that moment, if you'd asked me to describe an airline worker, I would have said probably unionized, probably pretty good benefits, probably a retirement plan. And the woman who came to speak here told us that she was routinely choosing between buying groceries and getting health care. Apocalypse. This unveiling is hard. Maybe what makes apocalypse hard is that once the unveiling happens, it's hard to go back to how you were before. You can try, even after you learn about how hard it is to get access to mental health care and addiction services, about how domestic violence puts a crack in your life that you can never entirely glue back together. You can keep on telling stories about how the people sleeping in the street just need to pull harder on their bootstraps. But after the apocalypse, these stories kind of feel like lies. They feel like lies that we are telling to ourselves and lies that we are telling to Jesus. And in this respect, the idea that apocalypse is the end of the world suddenly isn't entirely wrong. When you see this stuff, the world as it used to be is unavailable to you anymore. This is like when you first realize that your parents are fallible. This is like when Adam and Eve bite into that first fruit. You can't go back to how things were. I've always known without being fully aware. Now I know that I know. And while that's hard news, it's also good news. Slavery comes to an end when there's an apocalypse, and too many people realize that they can no longer tell self-soothing lies about how it is a benign or a kindly institution. Women get the vote when there's an apocalypse, and too many people realize that they are living with institutionalized misogyny. The Berlin Wall falls when there is an apocalypse, and a whole lot of people know what they always knew, that the wall was not keeping the invading hordes out, but was keeping everyone inside from being free. There was a time in which some or all of these apocalypses felt like oh no moments. Historians remind us that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was not particularly popular during the 1960s. The stuff that he was unveiling was stuff that people did not want to see. But his work and these other apocalypses, they feel like the coming of the kingdom now. What apocalypses do we need today? What do we need unveiled? What do we need to see in a way that once seen we cannot go back? Maybe we need to unveil that celebrating as the Dow hits 30,000 while people in this country go hungry is an obscenity. Maybe we need to unveil that the accumulation of stuff as the world gets hotter and burns is an act of desecration, an act of vandalism against God's creation. Maybe we need to unveil that our worship of guns means that we have our fingers crossed when we worship Jesus. What else? None of these apocalypses are easy. They, all of them, feel a bit like the sun going dark and the stars falling. But if Jesus is with us, and Jesus is with us, then the dark sun never gets to have the last word. Oh no, never gets to have the last word. With Jesus' help, oh no will become aha, which will become tada. Jesus is unveiling something new. I started by saying, in the beginning was the apocalypse. But maybe that's backwards. Maybe what's really true is this. There is apocalypse, and then things begin.